go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Truong. I am from Unity. I'm not taking the stage after Bill Gates, but I'm following after Jessica Lindo, my boss, so no pressure. So today's session is AR, VR training for Workforce finally here? And we have our amazing panelists, which I'd like to welcome to give a quick introduction to the audience. We'll start from Derek, and we'll go down.
Hi, everyone. My name is Derek Belch. I am the founder and CEO of Strivr. For those of you who do not know about us, we originally started in sports back in 2015 using virtual reality to train quarterbacks. And then, as many startups do, we got a very lucky phone call from someone at Walmart about 18 months in, back in 2016. And they said, we saw your quarterback trainer, and we'd love to talk to you about employee training. Can you come on down here? And so that began our pivot into the enterprise. Today, we are leading the way in using virtual reality to train employees at Fortune 1000 organizations. And that word finally in the title irks me a little bit because this is year 9. So I don't know, finally, I feel like it's been here for a while, but maybe people are just starting to wake up. So I look forward to having that conversation as we go.
My name is Sabina Schneider. I am Chief Solutions Officer for Globant. Globant is a digitally native company. We do from consulting to implementation of a very varied level of technologies. We do implementations with partners like Google, Amazon, Salesforce, and of course, customized solutions. One of our specializations is in VR, metaverse, AI, so embedding data for enriching experiences, and our specialization as well is in EdTech. So it's a pleasure to be here and share our knowledge and experience there.
Hello. Wow, hey. My name's Justin. I am a former game developer turned orthopedic surgeon. Sort of our story is when wanting to make video games, I had a family member become very ill, and I woke up one day, I'm like, hey, maybe there's a way to use this passion I have for software and technology, not for entertainment, but to help people. So I ended up studying biomedical engineering, wanting to invent new healthcare technology, but I didn't really know how to get started. So I was asking around for advice, and someone told me, Justin, if you want to invent something, you really need to understand the problem you're trying to solve first. And he thought that a great way to understand medical problems was to be a doctor. So I took his advice a little too literally. I went to medical school at UCLA and did my orthopedic surgery training there. And that's where I experienced what I think is one of the biggest challenges we have today in healthcare, which is how we train and assess healthcare professionals in procedures in surgery. And people would ask me in the middle of surgery, some of the top hospitals in the world, be like, hey, Justin, can you go Google what we're doing real quick? I'm like, oh my God. So I got involved in virtual reality very early because of my gaming background. I'm like, wow, what an incredible solution. You can use it anytime, anywhere, train on any procedure, and use your hands in a realistic way. So combined my passion for video games and healthcare and started Osso VR in 2016 as the world's largest VR surgical training platform.
Hi, I'm Eileen McGivney, and I'm a researcher at Harvard in the Next Level Lab, and we're a research lab that looks at applying learning sciences to questions about the future of work. So we're interested in things like how do we rethink education, workforce development, context to support learners being adaptive experts for lifelong learning? How do we foster dispositions that people need to change jobs and change careers? How do we help support workers to be able to work with AI tools instead of focusing so much on their possibility for displacement? So, those are the types of questions that we ask. And my expertise is really in how people learn with virtual reality. So looking at what are the affordances of these technologies to help develop those dispositions, help engage people's emotions and motivational aspects of learning. And I'll talk a little bit about certain projects in the workforce space, and then I've also worked in the K-12 space too.
Thank you all. So my first question is to the full panel. Could you all share one example of how you've seen AR or VR being used to enhance workforce training? And we can start with Eileen this time.
Sure, yeah, while I'm here. So one project that I worked on last year was partnering with Goodwill Industries Foundation and Accenture. And they were using a tool to help people who have been affected by the criminal justice system practice interviewing for jobs. And so it's a virtual reality simulation where they get to actually sit across the table from a hiring manager and practice going through a job interview. And so I think this is an interesting example to, Derek's point of like, it's finally the right word in the title here. I think VR has been in training in medical fields, in the military for, decades actually, but we're seeing examples now of trying to use it to reach different populations and for different types of skills.
I think, obviously Googling in the operating room is not great, but things have surprisingly gotten worse, and we're in a staffing crisis right now in healthcare. So while we're already projected to be short 130,000 physicians in just a few more years by 2030, what's happening now is this massive burnout problem on the physician side. So you have 1 in 4 physicians say they're going to leave medicine in 2 years, so pretty alarming number. In addition to that, you have a lot of nurses who have already quit. So the vast majority of the nurses on the surgical side and procedural side are travelers. So these are people who have not been trained, maybe have never done this surgery before. So things are getting pretty dire. So we are being used to train healthcare professionals at all levels, so nurses, physicians, even medical device representatives. And we have about 7 peer-reviewed studies at this point showing that we can improve performance anywhere from 230 to 300%, which is kind of jaw-dropping when you think about it. The results are pretty obvious when you look at some of the data. I think when I think about workforce, I'm not just thinking about the efficiency of training and the time to training, but also the pipeline. And that's something that I worry about. And I think a project that we did that seemed kind of random at the time, but is pretty exciting to me, was one with the US Department of Education. So this was in about 2018. They did something called the EdSim Open Innovation Challenge, where they were like, hey, we want to use AR, VR to provide career exploration for technical careers, for high school students and college students. And so we propose that we can use Osso VR to get people excited about a career as a radiology technician, anesthesiologist, orthopedic surgeon, and that the people who are often applying for these jobs are people that, your dad's an orthopedic surgeon, or your neighbor is a radiologist. And that's how people realize these things exist and end up wanting to do it. So if we can expose people earlier to these sort of more niche careers, they're more likely to apply. And we ended up actually winning that challenge. And we do an event with the Department of Education usually every year, although it's been a little interesting recently. But when we run kids through VR, every single one says, oh, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon now. I want to be an interventional cardiologist. No kid should be saying the word interventional cardiologist. But you really see the immediate effect this thing has. So I think it's a combination of increasing the pipeline, which these tools can expose sort of people earlier in their career to jobs they may never have discovered on their own, and then actually prepare them to do them successfully, which the data shows we can do very well.
Yes, we are using it with several organizations. One use case that I can share is, for example, to train people in sustainability certifications. So doing more simulations on walking the different constructions while they are actually building the buildings, and once the buildings are built, how to really do those assessments in a simulated environment. And that has been proven to be really successful, especially with more changing legislations and more requirements in the sustainability field. And the second one that we like really a lot is about Disney. We are working together for a long time with them and really training how the crew members are actually working inside the parks is something that is also very welcoming and is something that is very key for the brand. And using VR, you can simulate situations, you can really engage in a more personalized way, just as a way of, in a safe place to test different techniques and how to generate a personal contact with the visitors. And I think that VR provides a lot of opportunities for us to test different ways of engagement and really increase the motivation in how we deliver content. The traditional ways have been proven, especially with COVID. At Globant, we learned the hard way that training our Globers, how we call our collaborators, is also a challenge. How to keep them motivated, how to keep them aligned with the culture of innovation and really creativity. So testing new ways of delivering that content in a more engaging way has been really something that we can recommend testing.
Yeah, so since I'm last, I'll take a different angle on this. There's a lot of examples that have been shared that are outstanding. We have numerous examples with our customers. Instead, I would just like to talk big picture. So as was said earlier, VR has been around for a long time in the military, in flight simulators for pilots, in medicine, et cetera. We are now in the cheaper, lighter, faster era of VR. So what does that mean? That means that VR can be used for actually almost anything where you would like to put an employee or a prospective employee, no matter what field you're in, through a flight simulator-like experience. There is a reason that pilots have to log X number of hours before being allowed to fly planes, because flight simulators work. They prove whether or not a pilot knows how to fly a plane. We are now in a world where almost any job or concept or skill can be put in a VR headset, and we can assess whether or not somebody knows how to do that job or that task before they do it in the real world, doing it in a safe environment, et cetera. So that's where VR is awesome, and the examples are limitless. Now, to close, because I was told that we want to have fun on this panel too, where is VR not so awesome? Spreadsheets, data visualization. No disrespect to anyone in the room that might be at Meta, I apologize. Virtual meetings. Those things are not better in VR. They're not different enough in VR. They don't mirror the real world enough today. It will improve in VR, right? So we have to make sure, if we all care about this technology in this industry, we have to make sure we're using it in the right place, or it turns people off. And it's years before they want to come back. I can speak from personal experience. I've seen this many times. A negative VR experience will lead to many years of distrust of the technology. So we got to focus on where it's really, really good, and we've heard a lot of awesome examples.
I definitely agree on the mistrust angle. I mean, we went through that Google Cardboard era,
Yeah.
which sort of ruined everything for everyone.
That's a four-letter word. Cardboard's a four-letter word.
But I do respectfully disagree on the VR meetings. I don't think that's like a business, but it is an incredibly useful tool. We have a fully remote company, about 190 people, and we use VR meetings regularly, as not for every meeting, but when it's important and it's strategic, getting people into workrooms is unbelievable. You just get a lot more done. Everyone's just like, oh, it's so nice to be in a room with you, be able, like, by definition, over Zoom or Teams, you can't make eye contact with someone, because you're either looking at the camera and you can't see them, or you're looking at them and you're looking away from the camera, unless you have a specialized monitor with the, anyways. So I think VR meetings is really incredible, and I think part of, when I think about VR training and assessment, which I think we don't talk about enough, it's not just that you're doing something, it's that you can objectively assess something that typically, like, you can't really assess someone when, you know, they're restocking shelves or doing surgery. Even when we're training people in real life, we don't have a way to, like, know how well they're doing, and now suddenly we have all this objective data. But the other thing is that I say that people are like, well, why can't you do this in a mobile app or on a 2D screen? It's like, well, I can't join someone else and be in the room with them and then not only like learn and assess myself, but be trained by an expert or train with my team. And that is something I think we lose sight of, the fact that it's like, hey, we're taking training from being a very isolated solo experience, at least from the e-learning perspective, and making it human again by bringing people into it from wherever you are in the world. So that's my plug for collaborative training in VR.
And here's Eileen, seems like you want to.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna jump in that I think, you know, you're both hitting on a really important point, which is that, like, this isn't a tool. These aren't tools that just do one thing, right? And so it's important to be really clear about what it is we're trying to accomplish. So, like, in our lab, we say, you know, you could use something like VR to do things better or to do better things. And so, which do you want to do? Do you know, are we looking to kind of, you know, make virtual meetings better? Or are we looking to, you know, simulate something that we actually can't simulate typically in the real world. And so, one thing that from a research perspective that we look a lot at is, thinking about these different kinds of ways to simulate trainings is, engaging people's emotions in a way that like a typical learning platform won't engage, but that are really important for cognition. And kind of thinking through, what is it in the learning process that we need in order to accomplish something. And if the answer can be a textbook or a video, then VR is probably not the better option. But if it's something really creative and something really new and different that you want to be able to accomplish, then that's when VR or some of these tools can be worth the investment.
Yeah, I wanted to share as well that from the Globant perspective, we've been reviewing many hypes in technology. One that you mentioned, VR, but we have seen many as, for example, big data, AI. They have been around for many, many years, and I take many of our clients also take a long years to get back to trying it. But something that we really see as a way of working that works is actually to keep trying and to keep experimenting as much as possible, because things are not going to work from day one. So, and one more thing to take into account is to first start seeing the problems, the pain points, the business challenges, and not the other way around, seeing the technology like, oh, well, I have this tool and let's see where I can put it around and find a problem for it, but it's more the perspective of really being empathetic with the consumers, the collaborators, seeing what is the problem, and then see what technology can apply to that. Probably it's metaverse, probably it's blockchain or AI or even a simple website or another way of communicating the same content, but in a different way, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And love the direction we're going. If you have any questions for each other, feel free to hop in and make this provocative. I have some questions for individuals on the panel as well. Justin, I'll start with you. How do you modern surgical simulations in VR compared to the type of training you had when you were in med school?
Well, I'm just getting over being called provocative. That's a first for me. Thank you. I think, an important point to know, and this is just sort of like me being a surgical nerd, like you don't really train to do procedures or surgery in med school. And I think that's a whole other conversation of like, what is even the point of medical school? Like, NYU now is 3 years, and I think med school could be 2. Like, what is the end product? And I can tell you guys stories from my first week of internship where, people were like, just basic things that I didn't know after 4 years of education, which is kind of shocking. But it's really in our formal training that we are, learning to do surgery. So this is internship, residency, and fellowship. And then out in our career as well, we're continually having to learn new technologies, new procedures at an accelerating pace. These newer surgeries are getting more complicated, so learning curves are like 50 to 100 cases. And we don't have any objective assessment tools. So really, the only time I was assessed in my career, I was asked to play the board game Operation and remove some plastic pieces without buzzing, which I did, and I'm proud of that, but I think we could do better, right, in your words. So how do we learn to do surgery let's just talk about formal training to keep it simple. Just by watching. There's an expression in medicine called see one, do one, teach one, which is kind of scary to hear, but it's kind of how it works. So you just follow people around, you watch them do surgery. Eventually, hopefully, you've internalized enough to start doing it your own under supervision, or like sometimes you're in a certain hospital setting where it's a little more what they call cowboy country, and that's where we get excited as trainees because we can do more, which is scary for patients but great for us. So maybe giving you too much of an inside look. So we do get the opportunity to do cadaver labs and things like that. That's probably the best thing that we get to do, but that's usually when you talk about like the zone of optimal learning, way too complicated for where you're at if you're new to the procedure, and there's really no formal way and you're only doing it once or twice. And then finally, like out in practice, I'll talk about a really common use case for us where if I, as a surgeon, want to learn how to, say I do posterior hip replacement and I want to switch over to an anterior hip replacement, which is supposed to be, more minimally invasive, better outcomes, lower complications. That takes 50 to 100 surgeries for me to learn how to do at a basic level of proficiency. That's what the data shows for a fully trained surgeon to learn a new procedure that's very similar to the other one that they're already doing, or if I wanted to switch to robotic or something like that. So one of these medical device companies will fly me out to train me on a cadaver and give me some lectures, and then I'm usually doing the surgery like 3 to 4 months later, and that is a terrifying experience. I mean, imagine taking a test you studied for once 6 months ago. How's that going to go? And so for us, it turns into this dumpster fire, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to stick to the older stuff because I feel much more comfortable with that. And so this is so common in like our profession. It's called one and done. And so people are very scared or loath to try new technologies because these learning curves are so long and it feels unsafe for patients. So that's what we're really trying to do in the formal training setting. We're trying to make the training more consistent so everybody kind of coming out, you get the same product, you know, run into a doctor death type situation, which is rare, but everyone's seen something like that. And now out in practice to make it more flexible, that you're not stuck doing the same procedure that you're just comfortable with, but that you're choosing what's best for you and your patients, and that the learning curve no longer gets in the way of you providing the best treatment.
When I was talking about experimentation, it was not with patients, that's for sure.
And let's see, Sabina, you've worked with many large companies on emerging technical solutions. What are some big business challenges that AR or VR training could help solve?
Yeah, usually is actually to, the objective is the business that we are trying to address is being actually more efficient in the training cycles. As I see a lot of similarities to what you were explaining on really shrinking the time to really being more productive, cost efficiency as well, which has been a challenge with VR. But that's why I like the experimentation model of Google of trying different more cheaper options like the cardboard to start testing the technology, and once you find a use case, then implement that more in a productive way. But overall, is really being more productive, and the increase of engagement in the delivery of the content itself. So how we can address the motivation of the people to really continue in the learning cycle as much as possible, so not being just a one-time only interaction with the learning experience, but really getting them on board in a life cycle learning curve.
Thank you. And Derek, Strivr focuses on scaling VR training. For example, in recent years, you've partnered with Walmart to deliver VR training to associates on a very large scale. How were you able to distribute large quantities of VR headsets, and what were some of your major takeaways?
Yeah, so we don't have all day, so I'll try to make this quick, but this word scale is really important in the industry right now. Basically, here's what's happening for folks that are unaware. The VR ecosystem is not mature yet in the ways that laptops, cell phones, computers are mature. There's no ubiquity of headsets. There's no third-party logistics offering that comes with, from the headset manufacturers that does this in an efficient way. So what happens when a lot of startups, which is most of the ecosystem right now, get to a relationship with a large organization, that large organization says, this is awesome with these 10 people that I just piloted with. Now I want to do this with 10,000. And that startup says, why don't I just give you a link and you can send it out on a computer or a cell phone or a tablet? Okay, back to what I said before. Do pilots do flight simulators on tablets? No. So I'm not saying that's wrong or bad, because that's the only way that these companies can scale, but it's not scaling the in-headset experience. Okay, so I'm off my soapbox there, but that's just an education session. So what we have done over the last 6 years, for better or worse, by the way, because this is really hard from a business standpoint, we have actually successfully scaled the in-headset experience. We've deployed over 30,000 headsets across our customers. We've had over 1 million people put a headset on their face, really challenging in COVID times when everyone is scared of germs and sanitation. And we've done that with a warehouse in Santa Clara and a mini logistics offering. We've done that with software. We've done that with grit and people hours. We've shown a lot of what we do to Meta, Apple, Lenovo, HTC, and they were Facebook at the time, but Meta today. They've been like, what? Wait, you're doing what? Like that? Oh my God, right? And honestly, guys, this is like duct tape and Band-Aids type stuff, putting these pieces together. Now, we're very thankful that the hardware manufacturers today, and I know I kind of bashed Meta earlier, so I apologize. We're very thankful for what they've done in the industry. They've made a lot of this stuff easier, right? Now, there's still stuff that's really hard, but they've made it easier. So as of today, we've been able to take all of that like grit and services stuff to scale the in-headset experience, and we've been able to turn that into more of a software play, to where it's software that's running all of this. It's still not perfect. There's still a long way to go, but that's, in a nutshell, that's what we've done.
Thank you. And what are your hopes for the future of AR or VR training for the workforce? Like, what do you want to see next? And what role do you think generative AI will play for those that want to answer that bonus question? Because I know that like came up.
Two wildly different questions.
We'll start with the first one. Your hopes for the future.
Yeah, so I think that getting a more personalized experience, even using data, any kind of data, to get a more personalized, the design of the experience itself. So bearing in mind that, well, some people get a dizziness, for example, by using the device. So we have experimented in different ways of designing the experience, on putting the focus on different areas of the experience itself, so that you don't get that dizziness with some people. So doing a lot of research for that, for getting a better experience itself, and using data to have a more personalized according to your needs, so that everything adjusts to what you need. And what we are using ChatGPT for training purposes at Globant is actually to do our interviews. So when we interview people to get them on board to Globant is a key moment. We even have what we call gatekeepers of our culture as well. So getting more creative exercises for them to test how they solve problems, how they think about the problem. So for us, it's very important how do you think more than the result itself. We are using ChatGPT to get those exercises going. So that's something I can share.
Well, I think for us, at least based on what we've observed, you really shouldn't be getting sick in VR anymore, as long as the content meets like modern design standards and it performs well. You know, ideally above 70 frames per second-ish. I don't know what you found, Derek. So I think that is a stigma that we're sort of trying to like get away from, especially with standalone VR, where performance becomes very challenging. I think for us, you know, for the future, it would be, like Derek was saying, very helpful if there were mass adoption of VR headsets and just everybody had one. That would be a total game changer once we reach that moment. And then, you know, having to solve problems around content distribution and all sorts of other things, which are quite challenging. I think, you know, another challenge that would be great would be some sort of like standard from, at least in our space, from professional societies of like how VR training should work and what it should be, which we're trying to set. But the biggest challenge I see with VR is that it can do anything, and that you don't want to do anything. You want to do one thing really, really well, you know. And I think it just, the imagination goes wild, and the number of times we've been asked to do like surgical simulation in like a spaceship UFO setting like boggles my mind. I'm like, why would you want to do that? But it comes up very consistently, at least once a month. So we'll probably make a spaceship simulation at some point. I'd say with generative AI, we're looking at using it for all sorts of things. I will say that one of the most challenging things in what we do, which is this kind of like high fidelity, hardcore procedural training, surgical training, is really creating the VR experiences. It's a lot of content, it's expensive, it takes time, requires a lot of expertise, and if there are a way to automate some of that or speed that up and, you know, use generative AI to create textures, 3D assets, real-time ready assets, that could be a game changer. And so it's not there yet, but certainly has the potential to do things along those lines. Like if you were to ask AI to like, hey, create a human heart for me, it creates something that vaguely looks like a heart but has way too many vessels coming out of all the wrong places. And if anyone's seen like generative AI hands also, those are usually not quite right, and then common area. Anyways, I'm getting in the weeds. But generative AI is very exciting for a variety of purposes, and we don't really know what's going to happen next. And just on the medical side, as a doctor, there was a recent study comparing ChatGPT to a group of physicians, and they gave them like 40 different clinical vignettes, and 81% of the physicians got the cases right, and ChatGPT got it right 87% of the time, which is kind of concerning for my future.
Yeah, sure. So I think when I think about what my hope is for, you know, using these technologies into the future is that we get to a point where we're no longer really so focused on the devices. So on the side of, you know, looking at the research literature on how people learn with VR, it's been very focused on What if you use a VR headset compared to a desktop computer? And what do people learn differently? And I think that's very limiting in what it can tell us. And instead, we should really be thinking about, not letting the devices drive what we're going to see in the future, but starting with what are the challenges that we're all really trying to solve? What are the things people need to know and be able to do into the future? And then how do we use these devices? And I think as people become more used to them, they'll be more able to think creatively about what to do with them. And thinking really critically also about where their limitations are. I think that we've heard a lot, across this panel in terms of one of the promises of these technologies is being able to do things multiple times and get a lot of repetitions in with practice, get feedback. These are all really good learning design features. And yet, when we look at a lot of what VR is used for, it's a one-shot experience that somebody has. Or certainly in the research literature where we have the evidence base, it's only in response to one experience with the technology. So thinking instead about, what are we trying to teach? How do we kind of incorporate things that are really lacking in traditional educational environments? And then thinking about this as how we use the technology is up to us. And what we want to do with it, rather than really just trying to chase whatever we think the devices are going to be doing next.
That's a perfect segue to my answer.
Great.
As a quick aside to that point you just made, the one and done, that's because my observation of learning in corporate America is that it's very often a one and done, but I digress and we can talk more about that later. As far as the question, so again, I'll take kind of like a different existential approach since I'm last. I feel like I'm one of the more qualified people in the world to say this between the numbers I shared before with the trainees we've had. We've had NFL and college quarterbacks use this to Walmart employees and everyone in between. This is a very fascinating piece of technology. There's a lot of juxtaposition with VR. And what I mean by that is here we have a researcher from Harvard who dedicates her life every day to proving that VR works from a scientific perspective, right?
Well, I would say I'm interested in understanding how VR can support learning.
Okay, great.
Not proving that VR works.
Okay.
This is getting provocative.
That's problematic.
Okay, but at this point, we're in 2023. Facebook bought Oculus in 2013, right? So we're 10 years in. At this point, study after study after study has proven that VR is better than traditional learning modalities in many different areas, right? Whether it's knowledge or practice, or Justin shared some stuff earlier, engagement. So there's a lot of really awesome data out there, okay? So what I am looking forward to is when people will believe and not have to pilot and pilot again and pilot again and pilot again. And we're in a 6-year sales cycle with a large enterprise or an educational institution or whatever it is, right? These are very long, slow buying cycles. That's the reality of what's happening right now. And I think it was very well said earlier, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And how will technology, a lot of different technologies, how will those tools be used to solve it? So as an example, our customers say all the time, one of their business challenges is reducing churn, or we need faster onboarding and ramp time, or blah, 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 speed to retention. VR, as an example, is a tool that has proven that it can cut onboarding times in half. Like, I can look someone in the eye and say, we can cut your onboarding time in half if you do X, Y, Z, and if you put this headset on your employees' faces as part of a blended learning model or an onboarding model, whatever it is. And yet, there is doubt.
Why do you believe it?
Why?
Yes, please.
Why is there doubt?
Why? Yes.
Because they think the headset's going to make them sick.
Yeah.
Because seriously, because they went on a virtual roller coaster in a shopping mall, and they had, thank you right there, okay. Like that is what's happening right now. That's why the juxtaposition is real. You've got this amazing technology that has real, legitimate benefit, yet there's fear, there's FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I can't wait for that veil to be lifted, right? What is holding people back? What is going to make this cross the chasm? And by the way, I'm not talking about like people playing games in their basement. This isn't consumer. I'm talking workforce tool. Like just like a wrist scanner is on someone's wrist in a warehouse. It's a tool that works. Like these are tools that work. So that's what I'm waiting for. Justin can't wait to get going over here. Right.
Oh, I mean, I have an expression I always say where it's like data's not enough. Because yeah, the data is, I would say, overwhelming. And I think what's funny in healthcare, people are like, well, how do I know this really works? I don't know if I believe all this data. And I'm like, well, what data do you have that what you do now works?
Bingo.
And
what's the ROI on your
literally
current trading?
Nothing.
Crickets.
Yeah. So, you know, if you're looking at industry, which we sell into, there's often zero data. And then if you look in sort of the more formal training space, 31% of graduating residents can't operate without someone supervising them, which is totally wild. So, but I say data is not enough because there is friction with VR. And it's, you know, even at VR organizations, people don't use it all the time. You know, you have to have a really good reason to get in there. And so we try and give people like something outside of just like, hey, it works, to use it. And there's some sort of exciting thing. And for a while it was Oscar and Emmy award-winning visuals, right? That's how we like got people in. And you just have to find what people are glomming onto to give them the extra oomph to do something differently, even when they don't have to give anything up and it works super well, like obviously well. And so that's always what we're trying to figure out, that angle of like data's not enough. What is the exciting element that's going to drive the behavior change? But it is, yeah, I mean, there are definitely days I'm just like looking very longingly at a window and I'm like, I would love to jump through that bad boy after a conversation.
Yeah, go ahead, Eileen.
I think I have a bit of a different take because I actually think that these kinds of arguments don't help very much of like VR works and VR is really good. I think that actually there's a lot of instances where VR is not a beneficial learning tool. And so it's about being specific about what you are trying to accomplish and then how the simulation or program is accomplishing that. And I think that maybe some people's skepticism comes from the idea of hearing like, oh, VR is going to improve everything. And I don't think that's what any of us actually believe. It's that VR can be a really powerful tool for specific reasons. But I also think that we need to be clearer about, you know, explaining when it is and isn't beneficial and how it's accomplishing that. And I think that, you know, kind of lifting that veil of behind the data rather than, because most studies actually show pretty mixed findings when it comes to what we traditionally call learning outcomes. Depending on what you're measuring. And so, but you can explain those mixed findings by looking at what were the learners actually doing while they were in the VR simulation? How did we measure what they learned? And so I think being a bit more specific about how and why can also be another reason that will help get more people on board rather than relying on. Because on my side, I find I'm approached more by like, we want to put this whole thing in VR because it will obviously be better. And I'm thinking from a learning design perspective, okay, let's really think about what part of the learning model should be in VR and what shouldn't be. So anyway.
Well, and hence my comment earlier about meetings, like all joking aside.
Yeah, right.
Like VR meetings today, based on where the hardware is today, are not better necessarily for most people. So as an example, that's something that I personally do not feel is better in VR.
Right.
We have an acronym that we use to try to coach our customers, which is RIDE, R-I-D-E, rare, impossible, dangerous, expensive. If anything is rare in the real world, impossible in the real world, dangerous in the real world, or expensive in the real world, either with time or money, it's a really good fit for VR. If it doesn't pass that sniff test, it's probably not the best fit.
I think just on that point with like, hey, some studies are mixed, some studies show VR doesn't work, or it's not it's about as the same. Like, not all VR is created equal, and this I haven't really figured out how to communicate this the best way, but in the same way that some textbooks are god-awful and some are the gold standard and some movies are terrible and some movies are great, it's like, it is the specific VR training platform that you're using that you should be like, this is a study of that, not of like VR as a whole works. So yeah, we definitely want to get away from that language. It's like Strivr works, Osso works. It's like that kind of thinking you want to think about.
How does it work? For whom?
It's
under
like
what conditions?
Salesforce works. It's not like the internet works. You know, it's kind of like that.
Yeah. Thank you for the very rich discussion from our panelists. Before we close, I want to share if there are any companies or nonprofits interested in workforce training in immersive real-time 3D technology. Unity just launched during ASU+GSV Unity Workforce Grant, so please find me or look into it. And thank you, huge thank you to our panelists for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.